Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast, where we elevate marketing leaders inside and out. I'm your host, Veronica Rami, master marketer, executive leader, and mentor to ambitious marketing leaders wanting to advance their careers. Each episode is filled with genuine, unscripted conversations with some of the world's top marketing experts, accomplished leaders, and industry trailblazers representing brands, both large and small. Our goal with this podcast and everything we do is to help you master your role, nurture your team, prioritize your well-being, and evolve into an industry-leading Rainmaker. This is the Rainmaker Podcast. Welcome back to the Rainmaker Podcast. I'm really excited to introduce my next guest. You might have heard of her. She's kind of a female legend in the marketing space and the first ever Chief Content Officer, Ann Handley. I have known Ann for years and years and years. I've seen her speak on stage many times. She is delightful. She is charming. She is beauty. She is grace. She's Miss United States. I mean, she's just all the things. And I really wanted to know the origin story of how she was able to claim Chief Content Officer title before everybody else, before content was a thing like it is today. Now we all know what content is. Now there's lots of Chief Content Officers, but at the time, it wasn't like that. It was a new discipline domain in the marketing space, and she owned it. She owned it. She gave herself that title to elevate the craft. And I wanted to hear that story. I wanted to hear her perspective on identity. I wanted to understand her viewpoints and how she views leadership in the marketing space. And she does. She talks about leadership internally and where she works, but she also talks about leadership in the marketing, industry. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to kind of conclude the interview. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, Ann Handley. Ann, welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast. I'm super excited to have you.
I am thrilled to be here. We finally made this happen. So
I know. You and I have so many mutual friends in common. This was like, not that I manifested, but like I was gonna make it happen one day. I knew it would come to pass. Okay. There's so many things about your career. There's so many things about what you've done. I personally have your book in my bookcase. I've seen you speak on stage actually several different times.
Mm-hmm.
There are few marketing female legends. You are certainly in that Rushmore.
Thank you.
Mountain set for me. But I want to tell you a little story that I remember. So I remember years ago when I first saw you speak, I remember on stage or in the hallways while I was fangirling about you with somebody else, that you mentioned how you gave yourself the title of Chief Content Officer. Mm-hmm. And I'm used to all the chiefs titles. And how different things stick with different people for whatever reason, but like the novelty of something that I'd never heard before, a title that had never been used before. And then the fact that you were like, girl boss, like it's mine. Let me be known as such. Yeah. I don't know the origin of that story. Yeah. I don't know how it came to pass. And so I've always wanted to ask you how you took charge of your career like that.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of framing it, because honestly, I never thought about it as me taking charge of my career. For me, the title of Chief Content Officer was more about elevating the role of content within the organization. So where did it come from? My first company was, or is, clickz.com, which was one of the first sources of digital marketing information. This was back in 1997, which is insane to me. So 27 years ago, and I only know that off the top of my head because it's the exact same year that my daughter was born. 1997, founded clickz.com as, again, a source of information about this nascent thing called the internet and how does business actually use it to sell and to market online. Now, that seems a very pedestrian idea here in 2024, but like friends in 1997, it was a very revolutionary idea. Yeah. It was like, what is that? People barely knew what an email address was. It just was not something that was top of mind. And so 1997, my partner and I were having a conversation about what my role was going to be, or what my daily job was going to be. I was founder, but what is my daily job going to be? And I come out of a journalism background. And so in my world of journalism and communications, the idea of like an editorial job would have been like the executive editor or like a VP of editorial or something like that. But in my mind, the idea of content, when you take editorial and translate it into a web context,
Sure.
even then it felt like it needed to have its own name. And so, what was editorial became content. And content at that point, I was like, you know what? This isn't about executive editor, which felt very much like a journalism title,
Sure.
to
Yeah.
signal two things, like this new world that we found ourselves doing business in, number one, but number two, to elevate the role of that editorial, because this was an educational site intended to give advice and ideas and to teach businesses how to market online. So I thought, all right, well, I am the chief content officer. I head up all the content on the website. And so that's where the idea came from. And I've since ported it over to Marketing Props, a company I joined in 2002. I sold ClickZ in 2000, joined Marketing Props in 2002 as a partner, and assumed the role again here. And as far as I know, I am the world's first chief content officer. Like
That's right.
legit, I made up that title. It goes back to 1997. I don't know anybody who had the title before I did. And in fact, it was such a new idea that people would read it on my business card, because that's, kind of what we had. I'd go to a conference, I'd hand somebody my business card, and they'd go, "Oh, Chief Content Officer. Are you like in charge of happiness?" I was like, no, content, because content is really what's driving the web right now. That's what matters. That's how we're communicating. So that's where it came from, and zero regrets about it.
Well, that's really touching because, like, before knowing the story, I'm like, wow, it's so smart. Like, you were so intentional about giving yourself a unique identity in your
Mm-hmm.
own title to like stand out or whatever. And you're like, no, I was actually trying to do the art service. Like,
Yeah,
let me
yeah,
elevate the art of content. Like, let me elevate the
yeah.
discipline, the craft of content by putting it in my title that would otherwise be kind of, typical, atypical because you were a founder. And so,
Yeah, exactly. And you use that word craft, and that's
well,
exactly
it
what it
is.
was. It's like that's what I wanted to convey, because, even then content felt like this sort of colorless, odorless glop that you would put into a website. And eventually, like, SEO driven content, like in way back when, like the original SEO strategy was keyword stuffing and all the things that disrespected content. And so
Yeah.
what I was trying to do with that title, and also just to speak to the role of content more generally, was to say, no, this matters. How we use words matter. They are our emissaries. They are how our customers or prospects first get to know us and to see us. And so in
Mhm.
my mind,
Mhm.
that was an art and a craft worth elevating. That was really what I was trying to convey, and very much
Mhm.
what I still believe today. Now, fast forward again, 2024, I meet people all the time who have the title of Chief Content Officer. Content Marketing Institute has a magazine called, CCO, Chief Content Officer. And so now it's very commonplace, but 27 years ago, not so much. Again, as far as I know, I'm the first person to ever have it, and I never met another one, not until the rise of content marketing, which would have been like,
Mhm.
the mid, I don't know, 2009, 2010, sometime around then.
That's wild. That's wild. That's how much of a visionary innovator that you were. You're like, I did it before everybody else. Thought it was cool. That's interesting to me. Like I shared this with you before we officially push record on the podcast that I'm in the final stages of writing my first book
Yeah,
ever.
congrats.
And
Yeah.
it's like such a daunting project, right? Like to write a book, no pressure. But one of the chapters I just finished around how to do identity marketing, first finding it, proving it, naming it, but
Mm-hmm.
then what the chapter is going to be called, dressing it.
Mm.
And I make the argument that like a name without context, a name without dimension is meaningless to some degree. And the analogy that I was using in the book was like, even when I birthed my children and I
Mm.
told people like, this is Miles, this is James, one of the most immediate next questions was like, why did you name him Miles? Why did
Mm,
you name
yeah.
him James? And so people naturally are curious as to the meaning or the story, the origin story behind the name. And you want to give identities, or you want to give names or titles context, right? And this is
Hmm.
like, this is why I was curious to have you on the podcast. I wanted the story behind the title. But then the other thing that I talk about that takes identity to the next level is like almost like the personification, where you dress it. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it wear? What rooms does it want to be a part of? What does it listen to as far as music goes? Because, music is an energy, it's a vibe. Like, and so you gave yourself this title that gave meaning to the craft, but you also have dressed this title. If I were to make an argument, and I don't know, again, I don't know if you would use it in the same words that I'm using today, but like, you dressed it, you gave it context, you gave it purpose, you elevated it like it had a home. And you have your signature style on stage. I certainly remember your suits. They're gorgeous. Like, talk to me about the thoughtfulness behind because some people would say, well, that's a personal brand. I'm like, I think it's more than just a personal brand.
Hmm.
So, like, talk to me about your evolution as a chief content officer.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, first of all, I think the idea of a chief content officer embedded in that is that word chief, right? It's
Yeah.
elevating content to
Yeah.
the C-suite, so it's elevating content's importance, but it's also elevating the role of the chief content officer. So not just the
Right.
thing itself that we work with and produce and publish, but also the leadership of that
Mm-hmm.
person. And so, it took me a while. I think it took me much longer to dress in your words, or what I would say, like embody, like truly embody
Mm.
the leadership that's suggested by the title. It took me much longer to do that than it did to see how important the output was, in other words. So what I'm saying is, like, the fact that content was chief, I was all in on from the beginning. But the fact that I was chief of content was
Mm-hmm.
less obvious to me. I won't say that I like, it's not that I didn't want it. It just wasn't as obvious to me. And so all the things that you talk about, the dressing of, like, literal dressing of what I wear and how I
Mm-hmm.
present myself, and
Mm-hmm.
speaking on stage. I didn't start speaking
Mm-hmm.
on stage until 2010. So
Yeah.
13 years into, after I founded my first company. Like, why did it take me so long? If I had this title of chief, wasn't I responsible for leading, and in some ways leading an industry forward as my role within the industry and as my voice grew? So
Mm-hmm.
why didn't I step onto stage before that? And a big piece of it was that I needed to get there myself. Like, I needed to understand what I could convey to marketing as a leader was much more than just what I was publishing and producing. It was also who I was, which I think is kind of what you're getting to, right? The crux of your
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
So the more that I thought about that, the more I realized, yes, you got to get on stage, even though, like, at first it was not a very comfortable place for me to be. Like, now I love it, but
Yeah. Now you're
I
like,
wasn't a
you
theater
own it.
kid who, like, couldn't wait to, like, strut onto stage. Like, that wasn't me. Like, I have plenty of friends, I'm sure you do too, who like,
Yeah.
that was them. They live and breathe under stage, like that's who they are. But that wasn't me. I never really had that aspiration. But it was only when I realized that to be a leader in this space, to have a voice, that and to contribute things that I felt were important for the industry to know and to hear and to absorb, to do all that, I needed to put myself out there and not just the content that I was producing. So that
Mm.
was really the crux of that evolution for me. Once I realized that, and once I internalized it, and once I thought, okay, well, I guess we're doing this. And so, yeah, so that's how it happened. The other thing, like, the suits and my style, like, that all
Yes.
came later. But
Yes.
initially, it was really about getting comfortable with me stepping onto a stage and understanding that there's not a persona that you put on, like, when you step onto a stage. Like, you don't
Yeah.
put on, like, a jacket and then you're suddenly like, hey, jazz hands, like, Ann Handley on stage. At least for me. Like, maybe this is true of other people, but for me this is not true. And what's not true is that there's nothing I step on stage and become. There's no artifice to it. It's the evolution of me as a speaker became when who I am off stage, offline self, and putting those two things on stage together and realizing that it's not about pretending to be somebody or not showing up as your authentic self as a leader, as a speaker, as a writer, anything, as a marketer. Instead, it's really about just making sure that you're showing your full self on stage. And there's
Totally.
a certain vulnerability to that that I kind of had to get used to, but for me, it's just made a huge difference, and it's just how I show up now.
Well, and it's interesting to me too because like I think all of us have our stages. I think for me, a stage is not as intimidating as the book. Like this
Mm.
writing this book is like because and I literally start my introduction this way like I don't identify as a writer. And
Mm.
yet I've spent a lot of money and a lot of time to put this book supposedly in your hands. And I
Yeah.
think that's the whole point is because I want to identify as a writer, and that requires, effort, or in my case, the wallet achieves what the mind wants to believe, right? And so with you, obviously, words are more natural to you. They come off your fingertips like, like they shoot
Mm.
out your little fingertips. But the stage, the physical stage, I think was like the next unlocking of your
Hmm. Yeah.
leadership, your visibility, your play. I mean, all the things. And I've had different people on the podcast say, like, it was imposter syndrome that held them back for a long time. It was the fear of what could I possibly say that hasn't already been said. It was, personality, like I'm an introvert, not an extrovert. And so everybody has their
Yeah.
barriers to their stage in life. I'm curious for you, because what you described is such a logical like conclusion, like, well, logically when it was made aware, apparent to me that like in order for me to take this to the next level I would have to also like
Hmm.
speak on it and like, yeah, that makes logical sense, but emotionally
Yeah, what I
like
have to get
I
over.
would imagine it wasn't that easy.
Yeah, it kind of wasn't, but it kind of was in the sense
Okay,
that
tell me.
first of all, I knew that I needed help, so I hired coaches to help me. I hired a speaking coach and a stage coach to help me craft a speech, but also how to present it on stage. So getting that
Sure.
kind of help was really just about growing my confidence, and then understanding that yeah, I could learn everything, but I still needed to internalize it and make it my own. So yeah, so I think once I did that, that really helped my confidence. Like for me, it was never about imposter syndrome or feeling like I just was scared. I mean, I was probably a little fearful, but really
Sure.
for me, it was more rooted in I just didn't want to. It's just it was never an aspiration. I never would see somebody on stage and think, I could do that. I want to do that. That's going to be me. So it's a little bit of being a reluctant speaker, I guess, but also seeing that it's important. It's an important thing to do, to put yourself out there and to connect with people directly, to look into an audience and see their eyes looking back at you. Like that gives me energy now, and I love that so much. But I used to think, well, I'm already writing and I'm producing lots of content. Like I'm already doing that. Why do I need to do that? It's just more that I didn't want to, and I didn't really know what I would get back from it. So it was more those two things for me.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense to me. That's so funny. Yeah, now I so it's the like the how they talk about like the runner's high. For me, it's like the speaker high, like
Yeah.
like it's just like a high when you get off the stage. You're like, let's do it again. Let's run the marathon again. And so when I get nervous now, it's not nervous that I don't know what I'm doing. It's nervous like I want to make sure it lives up to the hype. It's more performative nerves, like, oh, I just want to make sure I do a great job for
Yeah.
those that put me on the stage in the first place. So it's different. I
Yeah.
want to ask you something because you brought up leadership, and I, especially because you're such a, I think, famed female leader when it comes to like in the marketing world, and there's few of us. And so I'm curious, like, what's Anne's definition of leadership? Like, how do you define leadership? How do you view it? Put me in your lens. Like, take me into your mind about this.
Yeah, I think about leadership as a combination of a few things. So I don't think it's I can define it in any one single way. But for me, it's it's a few things are wrapped up into it. Number one is a willingness to put yourself out there, to speak what you believe is true, to speak your truth, so to speak. But the second thing is the willingness to admit you're wrong, because whenever I see somebody make a very strong statement about something, and even if they're backing it up, and even if they are very, like, sure-footed in their perspective and in their, in the ground that they're standing on, um, and this happens with me too. It's like I can feel that way sometimes, but I always in the back of my head is the notion that I might be wrong about this, and I'm willing to admit that I'm wrong about it if somebody gives me an argument why I might be wrong. I think some leaders see that as a weakness. You've got to be like the strong person who is like out there just planting a flag on the top of a mountain saying this is truth, this is what's right. And while I believe it's important to have conviction, I also think that you need to have humility and to understand that you may not be 100% right in all situations, and you've got to be open to that. And so, what that suggests is, of course, like being willing to be wrong, being willing to be a little vulnerable and admit you're wrong, but also just being open to others' points of view. And those two things to me, like being willing to say something that you believe in is important and to speak your truth, but also to show up with humility, those two things together for me are essentially what guide me as a leader. And I mean that both at Marketing Profs, but also more broadly just within the marketing industry itself.
I love assessments so much, and I love taking the person like, what Disney princess are you? To from that to like, your strength finders, your Colby, you're this, you're that. And there's an assessment I took 2 years ago that it's called the Harrison assessment, and it's a leadership assessment. And the whole, which I've never seen something do quite like this, where it shows where you grade in paradoxical qualities, in a
Mm.
spectrum of paradoxical qualities. So like the argument is like the best leaders are always paradoxical. Like you are equal parts open and equal parts certain. You are approachable, but also commanding. Like
Yeah.
you have to possess both of these things. And when you are in balance of these opposing qualities, you are actually the best leader possible
Hmm.
versus somebody that is too, right, like too far where you're like, man, he's like,
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, anybody who's a parent can understand if you're too much of a permissive parent or you're too much of an authoritative force, your children fear you, and you're like finding yourself in the middle. It's the same, I think, concept in leading in the home as you would leading in the workplace.
Hmm.
And I think female leaders, I think, are oftentimes a little bit more gifted in carrying these paradoxical qualities and knowing intuitively when to be more soft or when to be more firm or when to be more this and when to be more that. And
Yeah.
it's something that I've never taken an assessment that graded me quite like that. And I loved it
Yeah.
because I found that to be really true of how I view leadership as well.
Yes.
That doesn't get a lot of attention. I think leadership is often defined in very extreme terms. And I think actually it's a lot more in the nuance in the middle
Yes.
than anything
Exactly.
else.
Yeah.
Hey Rainmakers, it's Veronica, and we'll get back to today's episode. But before that, I have an exciting invitation for all of you aspiring, ambitious marketing leaders. If you are serious about advancing your career in marketing and you're looking for an expert to give you some personal insights, guidance, tips, then I'm going to invite you to schedule a free Pathway to Promotion call with me. This is a special one-on-one call with just you and me to discuss your current roadblocks in your career, your long-term aspirations and ambition, and the next best step for you and your personal promotion. Head to pathwaycall.com or click the link in my show notes to schedule your free Pathway to Promotion call. Now back to today's episode.
And I also think there's an element of like inspiration and fun that needs to be part of it too, in terms of like how you're showing up. And I think this is probably more true of my leadership in the industry, like my leadership in business or my leadership in marketing. But I'm not afraid to do stupid things or like to, to show up in ways that may not feel very like very serious, and I'm like using like air quotes there, because to me, that's like that's part of it. And I think it's especially true for women, to show up in ways that are a little different than a little unexpected. And I'm okay with that. There's a lot of like, for example, sometimes I will say something or produce something, or I'll tell a story on a stage or or to an audience, And, when I get off stage, people will say to me like, "Oh, I could never do that," because it's like, you're making yourself a little foolish or silly, and I always say like, well, why is that a bad thing? That's the human parts of us, isn't it? It's like that's what you remember. Like I used to do a speech about my effort to convert, like in marketing, to convert a rabbit in my backyard who I was obsessed with one summer. Like I was obsessed with converting this rabbit, and the way that I would measure the conversion is through the sale of this rabbit literally like taking something from my hand, and a carrot or a piece of celery or arugula is finally what romaine is finally what did it. And so I don't know if you ever saw that speech, but it was like it's such a it's like kind of silly construct like, but it's so powerful, and it's like so fun and it's inspiring because it's something we can all kind of relate to. And do you know what? People still ask me to this day. Like I started giving that speech in, oh gosh, 2018, 2019. I still give it from time to time now, an updated version of it. But the thing that a lot of people remember once they've seen that speech, every time I bump into them afterward, or if I see them at a conference, or I'm in a meeting with them, they always say to me, "How's Bun? Is the rabbit still around?" And it's like that's what you remember. And so I'm only telling you this story is because I think those fun, silly, inspirational moments are the things that make you memorable as a leader. And without them, like I could stand up there and talk about converting a B2B customer in a very like logical way. But do you know how many people would remember that? Like no one's going to ask me, "Hey, how was the that solution that you were trying to convert the VP of marketing for that organization?" Like no one is going to remember that. And so I think being willing to just have some fun and to play and be a little silly in your style is ultimately what can really make a difference for you as a leader, as a speaker, as somebody with a voice to be not just reckoned with, but also remembered.
Well, so I didn't see you give that talk. I saw one of my most memorable talks that you did was like Charlotte's Web.
Charlotte's Web, thinking.
Yeah, because it was the author's house that you
Yes,
wanted to
E.B.
buy.
White's. Yes,
That's the
yeah,
one. Okay, yeah. So I
yeah. I
remember you
still have it
wanted to
here
buy
for
the house.
renovation in my
Uh-huh.
house.
That's right.
Yeah,
And I remember that it was elusive and you
yeah,
didn't get anyways. I just remember like I wanted it so bad for you. So I remember the feeling of wanting you to get that house.
yeah.
Like that's what I remember the most.
Right,
And like I
right.
was bought into that
Yeah.
story of like
It's the
wanting you to
story,
have it.
right? It's the story,
Hmm.
but it's a story that's memorable, right? If I had been
Yeah.
talking about trying to acquire, I don't
Yeah.
know, a new
Yeah.
Range Rover, like no one's going to remember
Yeah.
that. No one cares.
Yeah.
And there's a different, like, there's no
Yeah.
emotion to that. But this felt like big stakes. There was emotion to it. I told that whole
Totally. I
story
wanted
about
it.
like how important it was for me as a child, and the story itself became a metaphor for marketing. Like there's a lot of elements that wrapped up into
Oh,
that.
so
So I spend a lot of time trying to find the kind of story that I feel like will really um, bring my point and my message home. But it has to be the right kind of story that is memorable and is a little bit like silly and fun. And I don't know, I shouldn't use the word silly. It's,
whimsical.
yeah, whimsical maybe is a better word, because that's the thing
Yeah.
that people remember. It's just
Yeah.
sharing enough of your story, yourself on stage, so that people recognize themselves in
Yeah.
what you're sharing and what you're doing, so that it's not about you, it's about how the audience is relating to you. And that to me is like that's the magic moment.
Well, something that I know about your style, and then again, I don't know if this is how you would like classify your own style, but I feel like sure, whimsical is a great word too, but you said a word even on this podcast, and I've heard this word recently on a different podcast. I heard Andrew Huberman. He was interviewing this woman, Dr. Stacy Sims, and she's like a female version of him when it comes to like the just how to optimize female training and things like that.
Yeah.
And she was sharing these new supplements with him that he had never heard before. And he said on the pod, he's like, "Oh, I delight in these things,
Oh,
like
I love that. Yeah.
these discoveries." He was like so excited that she was teaching him something that he didn't already know, and he's pretty freaking smart. And you said just barely in the last 5-10 minutes, you were like, "Oh, maybe because maybe this will be cut out so people won't hear it, but our dogs both went off.
Oh, it
So
delighted
my
me. It
dog
did.
went
Yeah.
off
Yeah.
and your dog went off in 2 states.
Yes.
And you were like, I delight in the fact that they're doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. That is
And I
true.
think your speeches to me are like riddled with little delights,
Hmm.
little delights, because whether it's the story of Charlotte's Web or your shed or the meaning behind the house and your as a little girl, like there's always like a little delightful quality throughout. And I think that's
Hmm.
such a juicy little word that I think was, when I think of you as a speaker, I would put that word next to you in your
Hmm.
speaking style,
Yeah.
because I'm delighted as an audience member, but I also feel your delight as you're giving it and relaying the story so
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what communicates. Anyways, just my 2 cents. But
Yeah. That's
you
really
didn't,
helpful.
anyways, you didn't ask for that.
You're
I have
very
a
good at
question for
giving
you.
feedback, by the way. Like you're very
Oh,
good at, no, you really are. And I'm not saying because you're flattering me. I mean, you're very good about just like even the way that you frame the chief content officer question is like,
mm,
how you saw it as like me, like,
mm-hmm,
embodying or elevating my
mm-hmm,
role. Um,
mm-hmm.
and I don't know. So it's a really nice, it's a nice gift that you
Oh,
have the
thanks.
way you do that.
Thank you. I want to ask you about, because I mentor a lot of marketers, and the thing that comes up in almost the majority of our coaching sessions or mentorship sessions or group coaching sessions, whether it's one-on-one or group style,
Hmm.
is that they're just not embodying, to use your word, right? Like they're not embodying the identity of leader. And again, leaders come in all titles, right? I call them rainmakers because we make it rain.
Yeah.
Whether it's chief, that, or director, like, and I think a lot of people think, oh, when I get the new label, the
Hmm.
new title, the new whatever, then I will, my leadership will just permeate. It's like, no, it doesn't work like
Yeah.
that. That's a mirage. And so I feel like a lot of young marketers or young professionals, identity is a big obstacle. And by the way, it's not just with the working professionals where they are defined by the person, their employers, or the company they work for, because that's, titles are given to them.
Hmm.
It's obviously a big issue with entrepreneurs because now we're in a position where we have to self-title and we have to introduce ourselves to the world in our way because it's on our terms. It's if it's our business. And so I have a lot of CEOs that struggle to understand their visionary identity. I have a lot of marketers who struggle to understand their rainmaker identity. Like, it's an issue.
Mm.
I would imagine this comes up for you both internally and obviously observationally with you in the industry, as prolific as you are and as out there as you are on speaking and stages and things like that. Like, what is it about people's inability or struggle to step into the identity that would unlock better leadership qualities for them?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think from a marketing standpoint, which is, probably what I see most, it's
Mm-hmm.
because very often marketers, I was going to say aren't empowered, but I think maybe to the point don't feel as empowered as they have in the past. And I think some, for example, they don't feel as empowered as sales, certainly.
Sure.
And I think a part of that is because of the nature of marketing itself. The nature of the job is always changing, it's always shifting.
Yeah.
I've talked in the past about how marketing is a little bit like the junk drawer of an organization. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean it in the sense
Okay.
that whenever anything comes up, it's like throw it in the marketing drawer, give it a marketing, like, and then pretty soon the marketing drawer just becomes very chaotic, and
Yeah.
so at one point, we had direct mail, and now suddenly we have email, and now suddenly we have digital marketing, and now what does that mean? We have SEO, we
Mhm.
have content,
Mhm.
now we have
Mhm.
AI, and now we
True.
have, what about PR? We should bring some PR stuff in here. Like
Oh
there's all of
gosh.
these things that gets shoved into the marketing drawer. Contrast that with, say, finance. Like, how much has finance changed in the past 20 years or 30 years?
Ooh.
There are various
Yeah.
tools that certainly, come along that help finance accelerate and do their jobs more efficiently. But they don't have all these new things thrust upon them. Like they're not suddenly having to deal with like social media, and not just social media, but now like, Twitter and Facebook and TikTok. And don't forget about threads. All of these things, suddenly are part of it. And so I think part of it is just there is a sense of overwhelm constantly in marketing, and the
Mm.
boundaries are fuzzy. It's not as clear cut. And so that's why I think that marketers are very often, not empowered because their jobs are constantly shifting, and they're constantly have to figure out, they constantly have to figure out, what should I focus on and what should I not focus on. I mean, again, it depends on the organization. And with bigger organizations, there's definitely more of a delineation where you're on the social team or you're on demand gen. But, of course, but, at the same time, I think especially for entrepreneurs who are maybe wearing the marketing hat, or marketers in smaller organizations who are suddenly challenged with a thread strategy when they've barely started to figure out TikTok, is like, that's what I see a lot of the time. And so, yeah, I think that's a big piece of the reason why marketers don't feel empowered to embody that leadership role. It's because they're very often in reactive mode, trying to sort through all this stuff in the junk drawer. And by the way, I think that finance is like, I think of it as like the cutlery drawer. There's like there's like a clear, like, spoons are here and forks are here and knives are here. It's very straightforward. You don't have to think about it, right? You know where the buckets are, where the things go. Marketing doesn't have that.
So funny. That is so, I've never heard that. Finance has the really nice, like the silvers, like, and it gets polished and it's put in its order and its place. And then poor marketing is like, we have the duct tape. Why do we have duct tape? Why do we have super glue? We have ibuprofen that's expired? Why is there ibuprofen that's expired? Like, what happened?
And periodically, like, marketing is called to the task of having to go through, like, why is this ibuprofen here? Why is it here? It isn't on there. We should get rid of it, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, marketing has to make the case. Well, it's here because, it's like, it's very like dicey. Like, the grounds are constantly shifting beneath them, or beneath us.
What a great visual. What a great visual. Well, it's interesting. The thing that's going through my mind is my husband, he says this all the time, like ad nauseum. He's like, when I'm clear, I'm confident. If I know where to take the kids, then I have confidence taking the kids. I'm like, what? It's like I'm trying to get him to take our son to the Washington, D.C. safety patrol trip for his 5th grade. And I can't go because it has to be the same gender parent accompanies the child.
Oh.
I'm like, Scott, it's got to be you, man. It's got to be you. He's like, yeah, but I just don't have clarity. I don't have clarity. And he just like starts to get, analysis paralysis. Like, where do I need to be? What time? Da-da-da. But it's funny because, like, if clarity gives confidence, and marketers, bless their hearts, are like in a constant state of overwhelm, which is like the enemy to clarity, then there's no way that one can like self-produce confidence, let alone if it's given to you by a good leader, if you just happen to get one luck of the draw. But like, it would be like mentally, it would be impossible for you to produce confidence in a constant state of overwhelm. Do a talk on that.
Is that a question?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I'm like, yeah.
Oh, that's a really good one.
I think it's a challenge that we have to work through. We started this conversation talking about why I gave myself the title of Chief Content Officer. And so I think just to bring it back to that, you've got to figure out, you've got to figure out who you are first, who you want to be and where you're going.
Yes.
And I think ultimately that can help you decide what is important and what is it, because you can't do all the things. You can't hold all those things in the junk drawer, because pretty soon, we've all had that experience where you can't even open this thing anymore, even though you have a sense that maybe there's some birthday candles that you need in the back of the drawer there. And so, but I think it's up to all of us to, and I think it's leading ourselves from within, and it's also articulating it and being able to say to people, this is who I am. Like, listen, I don't talk about revenue ops. Like, I'm not a rev ops person, right? That's not what I talk about. And if you were to invite me on this podcast to talk about that, I'd be like, I don't do that. And so I think we need to remind ourselves that, all right, I am a content person. That's what I do. That's my expertise. And I can sort of take that in any direction that I want. But I think first deciding who you want to be and who is exciting to you to be. Like, who do you really, like, what really gives you joy? What gives you delight, to use our new word, or my new word anyway. And so, it's a
great word.
And so, I think it's all of those things. It's like, it's figuring out, what's important to you, what's important to your first, number one, and then secondarily, what's important to your customers, so that we don't get all that stuff in the junk drawer, and that we're able to sort of weed it out a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, and if anybody who's listening to this podcast needs more incentive to be clear on what you want for your future and for your identity, it makes it so much easier for people like you and I to like recommend them. So like I recently got asked if I wanted to be on an AI panel by like a very big stage, big name. And I was like, oh, I would love to be on a panel, but that's not me. You know, it should be,
Mm-hmm.
it should be Maritza. Maritza is your girl for AI. She literally, Microsoft flew her out to Europe to train their Microsoft European teams on AI when they are like an AI company. What the, like
Mm-hmm.
she's that good.
Yeah.
She's that unknown. Go
Yeah.
talk to my girl Maritza. It's not me.
Right.
And so like that's the beauty too, is like having that clarity, knowing the end from the beginning. Like it also makes it for us to recommend and support and uplift each other as well, which is also so nice because that's
Yeah.
really how the world works before the internet, right? Like it's just relationships, recommending good people to good people, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so
Yeah.
good and
And I think
juicy.
also it's early in your career, you don't say no. You have a tendency to say yes
Mm-hmm.
to everything because
Mm-hmm.
it feels like an opportunity. And so I think just understanding that, and sometimes that's okay because it allows you to try things at kind of a low stakes.
Mm-hmm.
But then also learn that some things are not going to be a great fit for you, and that's okay. You don't have to feel like you need to get better at it. Maybe
Yeah.
you don't. Like maybe you can just
Yeah.
sort of let RevOps take that piece of it because that's not you. And I'm okay with that. Like I used to feel terrible that I'm like very bad at math. A lot of marketers are bad at math. Especially those of us who come more out of the creative space. And so I used to think, oh, I should really learn how to. You know what? I don't have to learn because I'm this point in my career, and it has not really held me back all that much. And so that's okay. Like I don't need to be.
I love it. I love it. I've loved it, and I've loved having you and conversing with you and having you on this podcast. It's just like just the gift that keeps on
Yeah.
giving for me. So this thing that we do, or that I do, let me just own it. I think it's only fair because I've just asked you all these like there was no prep. I just asked you the questions I wanted to ask you selfishly and like let my curiosity drive the conversation. So I like to reverse it. To be fair, you get to ask me whatever your curiosity wants to ask me for the final question.
So, oh man, why are you doing this? Like, what is it about this
Which
project?
part? What's this?
No, 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 no. Like, what is it for you? Like, what is it about this? Like you said it earlier about how you don't consider yourself a writer, that it's been a little bit of a
Mm-hmm,
painful experience for you, as you
mm-hmm,
discussed. So why
mm-hmm,
why are you doing it
mm-hmm.
then?
That's a good question. And there's a couple different answers. One, I think a TED Talk, a book, a particular stage, you know, every little girl, every little marketing girl's dream,
Yeah,
vision board.
yeah. It's on
So
my parents' vision board.
yeah, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't like on the board, the legacy vision board at some point to just I was bold enough in my career to put my own original thoughts on paper, not in an ebook, not in a PDF, not in a
Yeah,
like, clever little opt-in, but like truly in a printed version. So I think that's always been on the list, even though I'm
yeah,
like, oh, and it's been there for a second.
yeah,
And then where I really wrestled was like, okay, but even if I write this book or write a book, which part of me, which part of my identity do I want to put on paper? Is it my thoughts on leadership? Is it my thoughts like, is it the marketing? Because I've been a marketer for
mm,
17 years. Is it about being, sometimes the only woman or youngest woman in a room? Like which
yeah.
part of my past could be like, wow. So I think that was for the last couple of years, it was like, I don't know which book to write. And then it like hit me that I don't have to, this is like the story of my life. I'm always in battle with myself, but like, I don't have to choose between writing my marketing book or my leadership book because the
Yeah,
two actually are always combined by the thing that I do best, which is identity-based marketing and identity-based leadership. And so then I was like, and then it just like unlocked all the unlocks for
mm,
me where I'm like,
yeah,
no, I can actually talk about the foundation to everything that I do,
yeah.
and now it's poured out of me. I actually, just so you know, I started writing the book at the end of spring 2024. It's now coming to the end of the summer 2024, and I'm only 3 chapters away.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's like so. It's been shocking. It's not even, it's not edited. Let's be honest. It's like very raw, but still, like it's been shocking to me
Yeah,
how this
yeah.
process has gone.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah, I mean, the only
thanks,
other thing I
friend.
would say is that it's funny that you say you're not a writer because, I did write Everybody Writes, which is the whole idea that,
Yes, I know. I have
everybody is a writer. And
it.
so I feel like I just needed to say that it's in my contract of myself, like with myself, that whenever I hear anybody say I'm
know.
not a writer, I'm like, no, you are a writer.
Do you know what's funny?
What?
And when I started the process, I took out all my favorite books, and I look like a little mad scientist in the office that you see, and I put them all over the floor, like, you know, the Donald Miller book and the Mike Michalowicz book and the Ann book and the you know, like I had all my books, and guess whose book was in the pile? It was your book.
Oh, thank
So
you. It's amazing.
yeah, you've always, whether you knew I was a secret fan or not, but yeah, you've always been like inspiring me, motivating me without even realizing it.
So nice. Yeah, I'm so glad we had a chance to do this.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anne, very much for being on today's Rainmaker podcast. Thank you for joining us on today's Rainmaker podcast. Marketers help other marketers. So if there's a marketer in your life who could really use a new perspective in a way that helps them advance their career, please pass this episode forward, share, leave us a review. Everything helps as we embark on helping as many marketers elevate themselves inside and out. You can always visit veronicarami.com for today's show notes, additional links to some free resources and tools for you to help you advance your career. You can always connect with us on social media at @ViaRomney if you want more behind the scenes or a way for us to connect personally. Until next time, my friends, make it rain.